Hey guys, it's Goosebumps Completionist, and today I'm bringing you an extra special movie review. This time we're going to go all the way back to the year 2000, and we're going to talk about a relatively obscure, formerly lost media movie that Nickelodeon put out. I don't know if it's officially the first Nickelodeon original movie or the second. I couldn't tell you. But the movie we're going to be discussing today is Crybaby Lane. Now, Crybaby Lane doesn't have any home media release or physical release, so I'm overlaying the picture here for the video discussion. I had heard about this movie maybe around 2011, and I saw advertisements on Teen Nick about it. I may have watched a snippet or two of the movie and I just forgot. But coming back into kids' horror, I've been kind of experimenting around with other properties and movies and book series that are like Goosebumps. And if you can't tell, my name is Goosebumps Completionist. I'm wearing a Goosebumps shirt. I tend to circumnavigate reviews on this channel around the kids horror subgenre. And I found this movie out because I'm also interested in learning about lost media. For those of you who don't follow me on Twitter, I hunt for Goosebumps lost media. And I always found the story of Crybaby Lane to be fascinating because while it's not Goosebumps lost media, it is kids horror lost media. And for those of you that don't know the story, back in 2000 around Halloween, this movie saw an airing one time on the Snick Block, and it was pulled from re-airing, and it didn't air for another 11 years. And there was a community of people on the internet trying to find a copy of the film, and through trials and tribulations, leads and false leads, eventually a VHS copy was found and ripped to the internet. And when Nickelodeon caught wind of what happened, they decided to re-air the film. Now, from what I understand of the situation, Nickelodeon for many years denied its existence. It said it may have misplaced the film. It was an accidental airing. You know, they changed their stories multiple times with it. But as we know, based on history, the movie actually existed. So it intrigued me to want to watch this, and I decided to watch it. And the first time I watched it was a while ago. I had a lot of stuff going on, so I had to rewatch it to kind of get myself reacquainted. And I have to say, the movie does not fare well on a rewatch. It really doesn't. The movie kind of shows its age. Because it's a Y2K movie, turn of the millennium, there's some outdated humor, outdated ideas in the movie. It's very cheaply made. I know that the movie previously was going to be a theatrical film, kind of like the movie Snow Day was in the year 2000. But that project was scrapped and shelved, and then it was changed to a TV movie with like a $700,000 budget. And the writer of the script, Peter Lauer, directed it. And Peter Lauer is known for doing stuff like The Adventures of Pete and Pete. He directed episodes on that show, and I really loved that show growing up. So when I heard that he did this, and he was associated with that show, I thought this might be something I was going to be really into. But if I'm being honest, for it being a kid's movie, I can only be so harsh on it, really. I can't be too harsh on it. I understand the budget and all of that. But I just want to say off the bat, I wasn't the biggest fan of this movie. So let's get into the plot overview without giving too much away. So the movie starts off with this narrator in this black and white montage telling a fable or urban legend of this farmer who had a pair of conjoined twins for sons. One was good and one was evil. And he grew so ashamed of his boys that he locked them away from the public. And as the boys grew up, it's never really revealed how old they got. But at a certain point, they grew ill, and one contracted an illness and died and essentially killed the other conjoined twin. And in fear of one being so evil, they were separated before they were buried. One was buried in the cemetery, which was the good twin, and the other was buried off a dirt road known as Crybaby Lane, hence the title of the movie, Crybaby Lane. And after the legend wraps up, it says on the legend from the townfolk who have heard this legend that if you go down a Crybaby Lane at night, you can hear the cries of, somber cries of a ghost said to lurk around nearby where the grave would be. And then it cuts to the actual characters of the movie here. So there's a mortician named Mr. Bennett, and he's talking to these two boys, Andrew and Carl. Andrew's the younger brother, and Carl is the older brother. The boys are really infatuated by the story, and Andrew seems pretty traumatized and pretty scared. But unfortunately, it's getting late, and they have to go home, so they take their bikes and they ride home. And then it cuts to them going to bed, and Andrew has this nightmare about these wailing screams in a vacant, field nearby a dirt road, and he wakes up in a pool of sweat, and he seems to be pretty shaken up by the story. And then he's greeted by his mom, who asks him what's wrong, and he said, "Oh, it's nothing," and maybe mentioned something about Mr. Bennett. The mom expresses displeasure with Mr. Bennett scaring them, which is to be, fairly stated. One thing to note about these boys and why they hang out with a mortician is that they live in this rural, small town, which I really enjoyed the setting of this film off the bat. I just want to get that out there. The setting really works for what this story is trying to set up here. So the boys don't really have many people to hang out with. It's very small, tight-knit. So hanging out with a mortician isn't so far out of the realm of possibility. But the mom doesn't want them hanging around the mortician anymore because he's scaring Andrew. And this upsets Carl. And we get a few scenes with Carl to kind of get a sense of Carl's real personality. And I have to say, Carl is pretty awful. He farts at Andrew. He literally farts at him. Tries to beat him up. He tries to catch him in the shower naked. This kid is very weird. I don't know if he has like mental issues or whatnot, but yeah, Carl is bad. And he's just really mean to Andrew, and you get a sense how Andrew feels pressured by his brother, to do bad things. As we'll see, after he gets, blamed by Carl that, he's the reason why they can't see Mr. Bennett anymore, Carl then asks Andrew to accompany him to the cemetery for an idea for a prank they want to pull on these girls. So they head to the cemetery, and they're looking for a plot because they want to use the story that Mr. Bennett told them to scare these girls. So they pick a random plot in the child portion of the cemetery, and then they place the sound machine there so they can set it up to where they host this fake seance, and they can conjure up a spirit, and they're gonna try to conjure up the spirit of one of these dead twins. So they leave the noise box there, and while doing so, Carl pulls one of the weeds by the grave and snaps it, which may or may not cause something to happen. So later that night, the boys go to the cemetery and they meet the girls, and they hop the fence and they go and sit down by the gravestone that's right next to the fence conveniently, and they host this seance. There's a couple of funny moments in this scene, but they play the sound machine and scare the girls pretty good, and then they laugh, and then they hear some actual whining sounds, which really creeps them out. It wasn't the sound machine, so they try to skedaddle because something feels weird. Then it cuts to a dog and some glowing worms that implies that something's not right. Something may have happened. Andrew and Carl might have activated something here. So the next morning comes, and Mr. Bennett travels to the cemetery, and he awakens the cemetery groundskeeper, and they go out to investigate the cemetery so they can, prepare a plot for a recently dead older gentleman. And while Mr. Bennett is there, he walks over to the child's portion of the cemetery and walks to a specific grave, implying that maybe, just maybe, this legend that he was telling the boys might be true. And when he goes there, he sees a box, and he notices that somebody's been there. And after he notices that, the dog from the night before is acting very vicious and unlike himself, which prompts Mr. Bennett to believe that something happened, and now there's some chaos potentially going around, because the dog is acting suspicious, and somebody was obviously there. As the story progresses, Carl and Andrew decide to break out of their window after being kind of grounded, and they break out and they get on their bikes, and they bump into Hall, this kid who's obsessed with Lord of the Rings. And Hall has a funny bit where he wants Andrew to be his dad, but Andrew's only 12 years old. Very bizarre. But the boys take off on their bikes to go find these girls. Well, it turns out the girls from the night before presumably have been possessed by something, and they're going around terrorizing the entire town. They're taking baseball bats to things, or running around recklessly. It looks like the mailman's been possessed or something. The town is starting to go into a little bit of chaos. Okay, so it cuts to later that night, and the boys are still biking, and Carl tries to play give and go on the train tracks, and he makes it to the other side, and Andrew's stuck on the other side. And then Carl's transported back to the graveyard from the night before somehow, and he's pulled underneath the ground, and then he's able to re-antiquitate himself with Andrew after the train passes, and he leads Andrew to this farmer's property, and they break into this building where Andrew falls into a pit of mud. And then Carl tells Andrew to take all of his clothes off down to his underwear, which is really bizarre. And then out of nowhere, him and these girls from earlier bring out some like lemons or something and start pelting Andrew with these lemons. Like really randomly. And then they all skedaddle and leave, and Andrew's left out there in the cold. It's a small rural town, I think in Ohio, so it's pretty cold during this time of year. I think they said it's fall. And when they skedaddle, a bull comes out of nowhere and charges at Andrew, but he manages to escape. And he starts running, and he tries to find some shelter. He comes across this property where there's a clothesline, and he grabs some clothes. And he witnesses one of the weirdest scenes I think I've ever seen in a movie, where these farmers start glowing their eyes white, and there's like a trail of gasoline that ignites on their lawn, and it blows up a boat, and they all just sit there and cheer. Like, what's going on? But Andrew puts on the clothes he finds and heads to Mr. Bennett's place of business, and there he confronts Mr. Bennett about what's been going on, and Mr. Bennett kind of reveals to Andrew that the legend may have been true, and the wrong bodies might have got switched. So the evil twin might have been buried at the cemetery, and the good twin might have been buried at Crybaby Lane. And he tells Andrew about the weed and how it grows through the heart of the dead. And since the weed was broken by Carl, the evil twin was unleashed. But to counterbalance the evil twin, you have to break the root of the good twin to balance it out. So now it's Andrew's mission to head to Crybaby Lane. So him, Mr. Bennett, and Mr. Bennett's assistant, which is like his nephew, are trying to get prepared to go to Crybaby Lane to fix the issue. But before that could happen, Hall, now possessed, comes and attacks Mr. Bennett and takes something that belongs to him. And Andrew and Mr. Bennett's assistant are now left by themselves. Now they have to be the ones to go stop it. So Andrew and Mr. Bennett's assistant get in a car. And Mr. Bennett's assistant's pretty funny. He doesn't know how to drive. But they get into some wacky off-road shenanigans. They get chased by a possessed cop, almost run off the road by a tractor trailer. They veer off into the woods, acting like they know where Crybaby Lane is specifically located. And they end up crashing their car. And Andrew gets out, and he's confronted by these girls. And these girls are pretty much children of the corn at this point. They try to corner him. There's a random big girl that was never part of the girl group from earlier. and she's now in the movie, and she wants to play a game called what is it, Kiss or Coochie or something. I don't know what it is. Something like that. I don't know. I don't remember the exact words, but something on the lines of that. Kiss or Chi-Chi. That's what it is. Kiss or Chi-Chi. And he chooses Chi-Chi, and the girl sticks out her tongue, and there's a spider, and then this bigger girl chases after Andrew, and he manages to stop her in the field, and he checks on her, and then he peels off, and eventually he stumbles across Crybaby Lane. And he goes into he goes to where the grave would be, and then he's pulled back to the graveyard where Carl was earlier, and he's pulled underneath the ground, and then he has a chance encounter with the evil twin. So this part of the movie is kind of confusing. I can't tell if he's pulled back to the graveyard or I think he gets pulled underneath the ground too, at Crybaby Lane. Okay, my bad. So he does get pulled back under the ground at Crybaby Lane, and there he finally meets the evil twin, who doesn't want him to, of course, release the spirit of the good twin. And there's about 2 minutes, you finally get to see the evil twin. He is pretty creepy. He has really long fingernails. He's eating worms, and he wants Andrew to be his friend, kind of like all the other friends he's possessed and stuff like that. And Andrew has to find his way out of the situation, and he may or may not succeed, and maybe the people might have been saved, and there's some type of connection with his older brother at the end, backhanded or not. And then there's potentially a new twist at the end. Maybe things weren't fixed. And that's essentially Crybaby Lane. So yeah, let me get into the positives about this. It's a very mixed movie for me. But off the bat, I really liked Andrew for what he was. He's not the most in-depth character. He really don't see much personality out of Andrew. But Andrew was weirdly sympathetic because Carl, his brother, was pretty awful. And after seeing his parents, I don't think I brought up the parents in the plot overview, but there's a specific scene with the dad where the dad, is asked by, the boy's overprotective mom to come help her find the boys. And the dad's like, just let them be boys. We don't need to go after them. And he's awful too, but seeing how his family is, Andrew's weirdly the most likable person in his family. His mom's overprotective, his dad is a piece of crap, and his brother sucks. So, yeah, I can understand Andrew, his frustration. Majority of his personality stems from that he likes a girl and he wants to be a ladies' man. He's also kind of alluded to Hall when he has an interaction with Hall, saying that he's trying not to hang out with little kids anymore. He's trying to be more grown up. I think he's probably getting to that pubescent stage. There is a layer of Nickelodeon cheese kind of sprinkled onto his character. But yeah, Andrew's fine. The character Mr. Bennett is played by the very talented Frank Langella. You might know him from the 70s Dracula movie. He had a very good performance. I love his voice. It's very dark and ominous. Mr. Bennett was a fun character in this movie. It was good to see Frank Langella in the role. He had a good performance. If you've ever seen the Disney Channel original movie, now you see it. It's pretty much on par with that. Can't really complain about Mr. Bennett. He was good. Hall and Mr. Bennett's assistant were comedic relief to the movie. I really like those characters. Really funny stuff. The evil twin, the main villain of the story, he had some creepy concepts with possession, even though they were utilized for more pranks, and then there was some questionable stuff that he made Carl and the girls do to him inside of that farm building. But yeah, the evil twin, even though we only saw him for 2 minutes, it was a good concept, right? And I guess the setting is also another positive I had. It's very cold. You can tell it's cold. Feels like fall. I like the rural, small town atmosphere. It adds a little bit of tone to the story, which I really dug. But my negatives, a lot of these negatives typically stem down to the typical negative trappings that Goosebumps books or Are You Afraid of the Dark episodes tend to fall down. And I would say that this movie kind of feels like the typical trappings of a weaker Goosebumps book mixed with a weak to bad Are You Afraid of the Dark episode. You have that Nickelodeon cheese mixed together with a plot that can easily be a Goosebumps book, which I'll get near the end as well. But the main problems stem down, I guess we'll start with plot here. Plot is very weak in this movie. It's very surface level. It flies by. There's no depth to characters. It's very shallow feeling. There's all the good ideas don't really get explored all that well. Even though there's some fun campy moments, some Nickelodeon cheese in there, the plot feels lacking. There's some stuff that I feel could have been elevated. And I will be honest, this movie had this reputation when it was lost media, apparently, that it was too scary for kids on television. I don't think the movie really fits into that hype at all. So, yeah, the plot left a lot to be desired overall, I would say. I think the major problems, I think, actually stem down to the film's budget. I think Peter Lauer had some good ideas, maybe. And I don't know what the original script looked like. I don't know what the original cut of the film would look like. If there's an extended cut, that would be cool to watch. But I feel like the movie was condensed a little bit too far, where it cut out some points maybe that existed or maybe never existed. I don't know. Maybe it stems down to the writing. Maybe it stems down to the editing process. Just the plot feels like it's affected by those things. It doesn't feel like the story has a weak concept or anything. It just feels weak in execution on screen. Another negative I have comes down to the parents in the story. Even though, like, the parents are kind of offset by some cool things in this movie. Like Frank Langella's performance as Mr. Bennett. There's a Jim Gaffigan cameo in this movie, which is really random. I didn't mention that in the plot overview, but there's a family of people attending Mr. Bennett's funeral home for this recently deceased older gentleman, and it's a young Jim Gaffigan. Yeah, so, like, the movie has some little Easter eggs in there to kind of chew on. And the parents, the mom is kind of overprotective, and she's likable to an extent that she's trying to protect her kids, but she's also unlikable because she's just overbearing. And then the father, he has, like, the one scene he's in could be, I can see it being viewed as funny and one of the funnier scenes of the movie. But to me, he's just awful. Parents just don't care about the kids. And I feel like they would have been more involved, maybe in some other alternate reality version of this story. But yeah, they sucked. And that also stems down to my least favorite part of this movie, outside of the plot, pacing, and, well, I guess I can include pacing now. Pacing kind of adjoins with plot here. Pacing's very rushed. But outside of the parents and the plot and pacing, Carl is easily one of the most reprehensible characters I've ever seen in kids' horror. Maybe he's made to be that dislikable, but man, that fart joke that he tries to do, the weird things he does to his younger brother that come off kind of pervy, like, it doesn't bode well. And Carl's character, when he comes full circle, he gives a backhanded apology to Andrew and then threatens to cut him if he tells anybody. Like, yeah, that's Carl. I just don't like the character. It's a little too mean, a little too ridiculous, kind of airheaded, dumb, kind of dumbs down some parts of the story that could have been better if maybe he was more likable. I don't know. Carl was a big mess. And yeah, so where I stand with the film, I don't know. I'm kind of mid on it. It's very middling for me. It's a very mixed bag. A lot of the problems are heavy-hitting problems, unfortunately. For Carl and the parents combined, I deducted 1.3 off. So now we're down to a 3.7. Yeah, the parents and Carl suck. And then the plot feels very skimmed, and then also accompanies the pacing. I understand that the budget probably played a huge hand in this. And I can't knock Peter Lauer, the director and the writer of this film. The actors did an okay job. Even Carl's actor was okay at selling how awful Carl is, but eh. So there's some things I can forgive about the plot, which is why I'm not going to go too hard on it. But I did deduct another 0.4 off for the plot and the pacing combined. So this movie kind of landed at a 3.3 out of 5. I'm not going to lie. I was pretty disappointed with this movie. It didn't live up to the hype, according to the Lost Media legend. There are some cool little Easter eggs in this film to enjoy, some performances to enjoy, some funny moments. I wouldn't say I was scared by the film, but it did have some solid ideas to work with. And yeah, I mean, for a Nickelodeon movie, it is a kids movie. You're going to have to suspend your disbelief just a little bit before going into this. It's made for kids. It had some controversy because parents apparently said it was too scary, but after watching, I don't think it's that scary. It's very comparable to an average episode of Are You Afraid of the Dark? And the plot, well, I guess we'll talk about the relatability to Goosebumps here. The plot easily could be a Goosebumps book. I'll give it about a 5 out of 5. Even though I do think it's more of a hybrid of a Goosebumps book and an Are You Afraid of the Dark episode, the plot easily could be a Goosebumps book. But if it was a Goosebumps book, it would be one of the weaker Goosebumps books because it tends to fall into those same trappings as the weaker Goosebumps books fall into, with just stale supporting cast and parents, or just dislikable supporting cast, a caricature of a main character, really no personality to them, rushed through plot, pacing issues, stuff like that. Typical trappings of a weaker Goosebumps book. So yeah, it could be a Goosebumps book. I'll give relatability to Goosebumps about a 5 out of 5. But like I said, it'll probably be one of the weaker ones if it was. So yeah, that's my review of Crybaby Lane. Let me know down in the comment section if you have watched this movie before. Did you love this or did you hate this? I'm dying to know, and I'll see you next time.